everyone, thank you all for coming to our monthly community event today, this month being focused on the real estate industry with leadership from Savills Chicago. My name is Lizzie Brand and I'm the president of the Junior Economic Club of Chicago. I'm pleased to see that we have so many people here. All of our monthly community events are open to any Chicago area high school student, and I know we have members from many of our other chapters in New York and San Francisco as well. If everyone could just type their name, grade, school, and why they were interested in attending today's event, that would be great. If you're from one of our chapters outside of Chicago, you can also include your city. We also highly encourage everyone who is able to turn on their cameras. So, just as a quick overview of JEC, the Junior Economic Club of Chicago was founded in 2014 and is an entirely student-run 501c3 nonprofit that introduces high school students to the worlds of business and economics through weekly member engagement events, quarterly economic forums, and ongoing community initiatives. Our Chicago Club has over 130 members representing 34 high schools across Chicago, as well as chapters in 8 other cities across 4 countries. So you can learn more about the club and admissions at junioreconomicclub.org. If you have any questions today, you can privately chat them to me at Elizabeth Brayan. Please just indicate whether you would like to ask your question live or have it asked anonymously. So I would like to thank George, Eric, and Brandon for generously giving their time to talk about their experience in the real estate industry and their role at Savills, a global real estate service provider today. There, they develop strategic plans and financial models that enabled their clients to transact on their real estate goals and align to core organizational objectives. So I'll hand it off to them to talk more about their backgrounds.
Impressed with the interest you all have in business at being in high school, and not everyone is as aware of the wonderful opportunities of this line of work, just business in general, and commercial real estate's fascinating. And I grew up in the Philadelphia area. I moved to the Chicago area to attend a small liberal arts college in the west suburbs, Wheaton College. I grew up in a working class family, so did not have a lot of direction as far as what to do with my college education. A lot of encouragement to go to college, but I ended up majoring in psychology. And actually, for the first several years out of school, I played full-time in a band. I was very interested in music. I'm a bass player still, and pursued my dream for several years until I got tired of being poor and hungry. And through a good friend who was a little bit older, like a big brother, I went to him and said, "I'm tired of being poor and hungry. What should I do for a living?" And he said, "George, you meet people well. You're used to rejection. I think you would make a great commercial real estate broker." And we'll tell you a little more about that. It's some parts of it are very natural and easy. Others are a little more challenging. But I ended up getting into brokerage. And for my beginning of my career, I represented buildings. I was trying to find people to move into vacant spaces in buildings and to keep and expand those tenants that were already in the building. And that's my area of focus with brokerage. Along the way, I realized I needed a little more horsepower, so I ended up getting an MBA at the Kellogg School at Northwestern, focused on finance and also marketing. And then around 20 years ago, the thing I really loved was pouring into people, seeing them develop, help teams run better, creating a good culture where people were really productive. And so I end up moving into different leadership roles. And I've worked for a number of large global companies, service companies that offer the things that we do as a firm, as well as owners and developers of real estate. And then 3 or so years ago, I had the opportunity to transition to Savills and not only help oversee the Chicago office, but help grow our presence in the Midwest. So that's what I do, a background in brokerage, but now in more operations oversight. Eric?
Great, thanks, George. Hey, everyone, and thank you for having us. We're excited to answer any questions that you might have and hopefully lend a few insights about commercial real estate, which is a really interesting field, and it's kind of what I'll call kind of a hidden gem, hidden opportunity for folks as they kind of develop into their careers. I think there's a fact that I've read that there's going to be an immense amount of jobs and talent needed within our industry over the next 20 to 30 years. And so we are actively trying to educate folks, and so hopefully we'll be able to do a little bit of that today. So I joined Savills almost 20 years ago in 2002. I used to work for Accenture. At the time when I joined, it was Anderson Consulting. So I was on large kind of consulting engagements really all over the world. And I had the opportunity to live in Argentina and Australia and really all over the country. And I started that opportunity after I graduated from University of Rochester in upstate New York. And while I loved the consulting job after college, what I realized pretty quickly is that the travel and the lifestyle became very difficult. I was on an airplane, I'd leave either Monday morning or Sunday night, and I'd come back on Friday, and I would try to fit, my personal life and get everything done in a 2 or 3 day window. And then I was back on an airplane. And while it was exciting for a little bit when I was young, it got old very, very quickly. And so I was looking for something a little bit more, that I wasn't going to have to travel as much, that I could also utilize some of my consulting skills and my finance background. And I was always interested in buildings, and especially living or having, lived in the city of Chicago for a bit, we've got one of the most beautiful skylines in the world. And so that was something that always fascinated me. And I got introduced to, at the time, our company was called Studley. We were purchased by Savills, and we'll get into that in a second. And it's just been interesting. Every day is different. I utilize a lot of different skills, and we serve a lot of different clients in terms of how real estate can help support businesses. And that's developed into a little bit more of a asset versus how individuals and workers and people use space, and how companies use real estate as an asset to help attract various workers. And so we'll get into everything that we do, but that's a little bit who I am. So I'm going to turn it back to George, who's going to talk a little bit about our company and what is commercial real estate. Oh, you're on mute, George.
I am indeed. Thank you. Got some dogs in the background here, so I was keeping the volume down in case there was barking. But now I'll tell you a little bit about Savills. Again, there's a lot of nuances and different ways that commercial real estate can be dissected and broken down. But there are people that develop and own buildings. But then there are large service companies, large global service companies that help owners and developers, real estate and tenants that are within those buildings with their real estate if they don't want to have those functions as part of their companies. And so when we consider the firms all around the world, Savills is the 5th largest global real estate services company. It's actually a UK-based company that was founded in 1855. And we're growing in the US, but in other parts of the world, Savills has been a dominant service provider for much longer. And we'll get to that in a second. But it's listed on the London Stock Exchange. Revenues for 2019 were at 2.4 billion, so a pretty substantial company. So over 600 offices around the globe with nearly 40,000 employees, as you can see, in 70 countries. So getting in a firm like this creates a lot of opportunity to maybe grow and work in other parts of the world, or doing different variations on what you're doing in commercial real estate. And here in the United States, the firm that Savills acquired, as Eric said, was called Studley, Julian J. Studley, named after the individual that founded it in 1954. And one of the distinctives that Julian Studley saw were a lot of these large companies have varying lines of service they offer, some of which can create a conflict of interest. If you're helping to manage and lease space in a building like I used to do, and someone from your firm is representing a tenant that's looking at space in buildings, might they be a little more biased to go to the building that someone from their own company is managing and leasing? So Julian Studley saw an opportunity there and said, we're going to focus our company on just representing tenants and giving them the best advice and counsel we can without any conflicts. And you'll see on the screen that we do that tenant representation, but also a number of things around it that help support tenants. We have the ability to do what's called workforce and incentive strategy, trying to help clients determine where is the best place to locate offices and where might they even get some benefits from the state they're locating in to cause them to want to work there. We have workplace strategy and sort of occupant experience. This has become something very important with COVID-19 because people haven't been going into their offices, and year after year, the amount of space that a given individual would have would be shrinking less and less because they are working closer together and things like that. And now with COVID, people are rethinking, gosh, when folks come back to the office, what's the best way to organize our office? You know, what's the right mix of people being in open areas and places where you meet? Should they be configured differently? We have the ability to advise on that. Project management, it actually involves building out spaces when someone moves somewhere. If it's not set up in the perfect way for their firm, we can go in and help them with construction to make that right. We also do various forms of consulting, trying to come up with solutions if they've got offices across the country, around the world. We have some wonderful technology to help them better manage and oversee their offices and the spaces they have, and also capital markets. We can really consult with some of our clients who actually own buildings, the ability to, is it right to own that or sell it? And what's the best solution for you that way? So as you can see, our number one focus is tenant specialists. We have no conflict, and that's one of the ways we're able to distinguish ourselves and get hired. And in North America, we have 35 employees, 35 offices, about 800 employees. And it was about 6 years ago that Savills purchased this company in the US, Studley, that was founded in 1954. And now we're part of their large global enterprise. So that's a little overview on our company. So this leads into what is commercial real estate. And, I reflected, Eric said that he had a love of buildings from an earlier age. It's something he was intrigued with in the architecture of a beautiful city like Chicago. For me, I think about my real estate experience. I was thinking kind of the first floor. I was thinking of retail and what I was seeing there, and not thinking that much about all of these, what's going on above the retail section of it. And as you get into commercial real estate, it's very dimensional. And there are many different types of real estate. And the great news about this is, depending on your unique interest and different things, skills that you have and want to develop, there's a lot of varied ways to get involved. First of all, we think of office space, right, with the huge downtown Chicago. Chicago has the second largest concentration of office buildings in the downtown of any other city in the US. New York's number one, Chicago's number two. Some cities have a far larger amount in the suburbs. So the types of, in a very general sense, office buildings you have the high-rise buildings, like you see in downtown Chicago. You see low-rise office buildings, which if you're out in the suburbs and driving around, you'll see that they may be 3 stories, 4 stories, even up to maybe 7 or 8, but much lower generally than what you see in downtown. And then there are single-story buildings where there's a certain type of user that likes that, the ability to just get into your space and go out, which certainly would have been a little more popular now during the pandemic, and you have to encounter others other than those in your office. But that's how I would break down office buildings. Industrial is a huge component. And when you think about industrial buildings, there are a number of different kinds. We've broken them down to manufacturing. So places where large buildings where things are constructed and put together, storage and distribution and flex space. And that's really when you think about Amazon, right? They need places for the products that they sell to be stored so that they can easily go out and come to your homes. And there's also flex space, and that would be research and development, R&D space, and also showroom space. People that have products may want to store some, but they also may want to have it in such a way that you can come and actually view the products that they're producing. Interestingly, about industrial, Chicago also has a huge industrial market, one of the very largest in North America. And I think that's also rated number 2. Just east of LA, there's an area called the Inland Empire. That's the largest concentration of industrial office space of any major city in the United States in North America. Chicago's number 2 and has over 1.3 billion square feet of industrial space in and around Chicago. It's huge. And Chicago is a wonderful location for industrial because from Chicago, either by road or by rail, you can get to 2/3 of the American households within a day. And so that's one of the reasons it's such a popular location. We have so much here. Retail is obviously very big, and you've got a whole bunch of different types of retail spaces. You've got large malls you can go to with a variety of stores, and some large tenants. You've got community centers, which would be more like a place that would have a food store. Might have a Whole Foods or a Mariano's or a Jewel food store. You could go, and then there are other shops around it supporting it. You have strip centers, which are more like the 5 or 6 store, 1-story buildings that you see at times that might have a 7-Eleven. It might have a dry cleaner, things like that. Those would be called strip centers. And then there are obviously standalone buildings. When you go to Chipotle or you want to go to Starbucks, many of those buildings are just single retail buildings that are standing alone. Multifamily gets into residential, and where commercial overlaps the residential market is in multifamily. Obviously, if you have a condominium, right, that would fall into it. But in cases where there's a single family home or perhaps a townhome that your family owns, those would be considered residential. But it drifts over to commercial when you've got a high-rise apartment building. Commercial is not typically managing or leasing those buildings. What they do is they finance them and they sell them. So high-rise apartments, multi-story apartments, which are just kind of like what would be the comparable of a low-rise office building. And then, of course, condominiums. All those fall into this multifamily segment. Hotels and leisure. And we've broken that down really into 3 types of hotels. You've got your world-class hotels, which are the absolute premium. The Peninsula Hotel downtown would be an example of that. You've got mid-range hotels, which are quality, and you go to stay at a Marriott or at a Hilton, or perhaps a Hyatt, which is at the higher end of the mid-range. And of course, budget hotels like a Motel 6 or a Red Roof Inn. Those are also properties that commercial real estate is not managing them or dealing with the daily rental of hotel rooms. But what they do, what commercial real estate does, is it helps to finance those buildings and also to sell them at times. And also, there's a variety of others. There's medical office buildings, standalone buildings, maybe near hospitals that are predominantly occupied by doctors and related health services. You have different entertainment complexes. You can think of oh gosh, there's so many, but it might be a bowling alley, it might be a gaming center, something like that, and a whole variety of other specialty things. So as you can see, the breadth of the type of buildings that commercial real estate encompasses is pretty broad. And then what are the professions in the industry? Well, they're people who actually conceive and put together the plans to build these buildings. And there are those that invest in them and maybe hire service firms like what we talked about. There are also architects who are designing the buildings and engineers who are doing all the work to figure out how to support the structure in a way that that will be sound and safe and putting in the air conditioning systems and figuring out the right way to do electric. There are the contractors who are doing the actual building of properties, would be a profession in the industry. And there are financial analysts. Those are people that would look at the numbers that would determine the feasibility of whether a decision should be made relative to building a building or selling a building, or in our case, helping a tenant make a decision which space they should go to, or should they stay in the current space they're in. There are people who do consulting around all of this. And then there are brokers, which represent what Savills does, what Brandon and Eric do 24/7. And we've highlighted the ones in red because these are the specific professions within the industry that our firm Savills in North America handles. There are people who manage buildings. And these buildings need someone to be there running them, to collect rent, to send out the bills for rent, to organize the people who clean the buildings, to organize the people who would remove trash, to be behind the scenes to make sure in the winter the buildings are staying warm, in summer they're getting the appropriate cooling, people to take care of plants in buildings, people to clean up during the day in buildings, people to help meet tenants and make sure spaces that are available are ready to go, to stay in touch with current tenants. Property management is a very diverse job and a big part of commercial real estate. There are lawyers, of course, who need to put together the documents for all sorts of things happening in real estate so that people understand the rules and are operating with agreed upon parameters. So lawyers. There are people who are lobbyists in government affairs. They may work for large corporations or large owners of real estate, but they're talking to local, state, and federal agencies, trying to make sure that laws governing real estate are fair and advantageous to people who are using real estate. Property managers pops up again, a very popular and wonderful profession. We've already talked about that a bit. And then there are also appraisers. Appraisers are those that look at buildings and determine the value of them. And that's important when someone wants to buy a building. That's important as someone owns a building and is maybe has some of their own money in it or money of investors, but they're also borrowing money like you would to buy a home. And then appraisers at the end to determine value when someone wants to sell a property. If they've created some value while they've owned it, more people have moved in and the rates for what they're charging for the space has gone up. Appraisers are also, after the analysts have run some numbers, are in an objective way comparing a given building to the market it sits in and like properties and determining what a fair sale price is. So that's a quick overview of the vast diversity of what commercial real estate touches, as well as the professions that people do that are working in it.
Thanks, George. That was really, really helpful, great overview. And so we thought we would take a moment just to kind of talk about the life cycle of a downtown office building. So office is our specialty in Chicago, in the Savills Chicago office. And so we thought we would just talk a moment about what, some of the components of a commercial office development and, the life cycle of an office building. And so, I'm going to start this with the end goal, okay? And so when a developer has in mind that they want to build a building, what they are really trying to do is lease it up to tenants or companies to come in and lease the space, get rent paid to them on a long-term basis, because these are long-term leases. These are about 10-year leases on average that they try to secure for their buildings. And then with that cash flow in place, they try to sell their buildings for a lot more than it costs to build them. So that's the end goal. Okay, so how do we get from point A to point Z? And so it all starts with an idea, as any element of business or an organization trying to figure out how to make money in a profitable world, right? So it starts with an idea. And usually that idea starts with, okay, a developer identifies a land site or there's a need. Okay, and so the need might be, hey, look, in downtown Chicago at this current point in time, the vacancy rates have dropped below a certain amount. So that vacancy rates basically mean that, all office buildings throughout Chicago, there's only so much of vacant space available. So that means demand might be outstripping supply. And so there's a demand that hasn't been met in the commercial real estate sector. So the developer will look at that and say, oh my gosh, look, we need to build a new office building that might implement new technologies, or fill a location or geography that doesn't have the buildings that are there, that are needed to meet demand. So it starts with an idea from a developer. Then they start looking at the financial analysis. How big of a building can they build? Because that's a big component of how much rent they can receive at the end, right? And how big a building they can build really depends on the location, what's around it, what are the neighbors like, and what are the relationships with the city at the time, with the aldermen in the case of the city of Chicago. And then also, what are the tax situations as well, because taxes play a huge role in buildings. And so once the idea pencils out, okay, someone builds a bit, someone looks at it, they might draw a few pretty pictures, engage an architect, understand how big of a building that can be built, how much does it cost, what are the rents that are needed to kind of support that cost. Then they might start looking at, okay, how do I secure this land? Okay, and they'll have a land site, and there are a few different ways to do it, and it really depends on the risk profile of the developer. They can just go and purchase it. If they're very confident of the project, they might just go and purchase the land and sit on the land. The other thing that they might do is buy an option. So they might say, okay, I'm going to secure this land for a period of 1 to 5 years. I'm going to pay the owner. And that option is going to give me the ability to purchase this land outright, but I don't have to pay the full price. And I'll pay the full asking price when I know this project is going to get full approval. So that's another option, and that mitigates risk a little bit. And then the third option is to lease the land. And so you might not have enough money, or the person may not want to sell, but it's a really nice piece of dirt, as some might call it. And then you just pay rent on the land, and then you have the ability to build. Just as a side note, in London, you really can't buy any land. You're leasing land for the most part for 99 years, because most of the land in London is actually owned by the Queen right now. So it's owned by the royal family, and so most developers in London actually lease the land from the royal family. So once you identify the land site, you start really working with the lawyers, and you work with the city to get approval. And this is a very complicated piece. The city of Chicago is a very complicated city to deal with. There are lots of stakeholders and lots of things that you don't even think about come into play when you have a development idea. Some of the things might be, what do the neighbors think, right? For certain, every time, neighbors are going to be upset. They're going to be upset that it's going to be noisy and dirty for a period of 1 to 2 years when a building is built. Some people might have their views blocked, right? Maybe they bought a condo in a building that has beautiful lake views, but guess what? If a building goes up in front of it, those views are going to go away. So these neighbors are not going to be happy. The city always wants parks, okay? So they might say, okay, well, if you build this building, you're going to have to build us a park as well. And so there are lots of little side deals as well that go along in building an office building, or building any development for that matter. But for an office building, there are lots of little side deals that might go along. Might be with the neighbors. Maybe the developer is going to give them, some extra parking, or they might give them something. They might give them the opportunity to use the fitness center in the building that they build, or try to do something else that appeals to them. And then you also have to work with the city planners and the aldermen. The alderman might say, hey, look, I'm going to only approve this building if you can assure me that you're going to hire workers from the neighborhood, right? So if you establish jobs for a period of 24 months or 36 months, that's a big deal. And so there's a lot of kind of what I'll call horse trading that goes on in trying to build a building. Then once you kind of get through some of that, you got to figure out how you're going to pay for it. And so there are a few different ways that that happens. You're meeting with banks and they're going to give you a loan. Then you might be meeting with friends and family, and then you might meet with other investors. And so those other investors might be, investment companies. They might be universities that have endowment funds. They might be other countries are always interested in investing in Chicago real estate. And so there's a lot of places where developers go to look for money. And then it becomes a little bit of a game of what I'll call chicken in a way. How do I get this thing started? Because a lot of the money basically will say, hey, look, we'll give you the money if you can prove to us that you have tenants to go in my building. And so that becomes a little bit tricky, right? We'll only give this to you if you can find tenants. And so now it becomes a little bit of a sales game where the developer is trying to go find tenants to sign leases for a building that's not even built yet. And so they're really just selling this art and architecture and location and what can be. And a lot of these deals are done, 2, 3, 4, 5 years out, right? So a company is saying, okay, I'm going to commit to this, but I'm not going to move into for 3 years because that building isn't built yet. But that's what happens. Companies will start evaluating their plans. Larger organizations will start evaluating their plans 3 to 4 years ahead of time. They'll say, I want to be in this building. And then once the developer actually secures these organizations, they don't have to lease up the entire building. Usually it's been somewhere between 30 to 50%. Some developers that have a very high risk profile will just go without anyone, but that's pretty rare. So most of the times they've got to lease about 30 to 50% of the building before they actually start breaking ground. Okay, and during this process, the developer's hiring brokers, they're creating sales material, they're putting websites together, they're getting drones to do some interesting, flybys and showing views. And then once they do that and they break ground, it still is a very complicated process. They've got to manage the weather in Chicago, which is very difficult. You can only dig in the ground on certain months during the year. Ordering materials. Sometimes these buildings are very fancy and they've got very, very interesting and unique materials, whether it might be marble from Italy or some special glass that's being produced that, reflects the sun and make sure that heat doesn't penetrate the glass. And it takes time to order all these materials. And so they've got to manage through all that process. And then once they do that, they got to figure out, okay, how am I going to operate this efficiently? And as George pointed out, there are people that specialize in this. There are property managers and engineers and how to develop, really interesting, and cost-effective ways of managing the building. And then while this is all happening as well, you're also trying to lease the space that you haven't leased yet. And so there's a whole sales and marketing process that's going on as well during this construction period. But as I said at the beginning, the end game for all developers at some point in time, it might not be when they finish, it might be 3 years after they finish or 5 years after they finish, is to sell the building. And the goal is to lease it up to the highest level they can. So the highest level would be 100%, but usually if it's 90% leased, that gives them the opportunity to sell the building. And the higher the rent that they're receiving from the tenants, the higher the price they can sell it for. Any investor is looking at what are the rents that I have in my building, who is paying those rents, and so is it XYZ company that just started that might go bankrupt in a few years, or is it the U.S. government or some Bank of America who the chances of them staying in business are very, very high. So that mitigates the risk for any potential buyer. That all yields higher sales prices, and so. That's the life cycle of a downtown office building, and that's we really play the role of filling that building with tenants, with our clients, and but oftentimes when our clients are big enough, we are involved in all phases of these projects. So that's just a quick overview. I'm sure I've given you enough to be dangerous. There's still plenty of, I'm sure you have plenty of other questions and we can get into that. So I think now I'm going to turn it over to Brandon. He's going to talk a little bit about, the day-to-day in the life of a commercial office broker, and then we can talk a little bit about what are the roles we have within our company.
Absolutely. Eric, that was fantastic. Very in-depth. George, also fantastic. And just a quick, before I get into this, guys, just a 30-second kind of thought. You know, myself, commercial office brokerage is a very small subset of the greater real estate world. And it's something that is never talked about. We don't recruit on college campuses. You kind of hear about it, you know someone. I was very fortunate that I connected to some people who got me to some people and wound up in the industry. So, you know, we really want to try to educate because it is something that isn't talked about a lot. And I think Eric did a great job getting into the building side. I'm going to talk through a day in my life, and the beauty of commercial office brokerage is there's never a day that's the exact same. It is different every single day. In this case, I'm giving you kind of my best shot at what a normal day is like. But again, keep in mind, it's very different. And the picture of a guy with his phone pressed against his head is very representative of our industry. There's a lot more no's than yes. There's a lot more frustration than there is triumph. But the small triumphs and the big triumphs are really powerful. So without, let's get into it. So 7:30, 8 o'clock, read research. I think it's very important, especially now that in the morning, you just see what's going on in the world. You know, whether it's reading the Morning Brew, CNN, Wall Street, I subscribe to The Real Deal and Globe Street, and Cranes as well. And those are great little blurbs that just keep you up to date with what's going on in the world. So when I'm talking to tenants, I'm knowledgeable, I'm up to date on what's going on in the market, what's going on in the world, what subleases have hit, you know, things that I should know about, I now know about. So I really try to allocate some time to understand what's going on. 8 to 10 o'clock, this is the quintessential part of brokerage, which is business development. So again, my goal as a tenant rep office broker, I'm trying to talk to companies of all sizes and, for lack of a better word, convince them, you know, to work with us to help them work through their real estate decisions. So whether that's taking new office space, taking more office space, taking less office space, moving to a different country, opening offices inside the United States, outside of the United States, downsizing, getting rid of the office, anything in that whole spectrum kind of falls into our bucket. So how do I do that? Well, there are hundreds of brokers in Chicago and hundreds across the world. So the key with business development is trying to differentiate yourself. And the beauty of business development is there's no right or wrong way to do things. So I put down there call, email, LinkedIn. So call references cold calling, which is kind of an old pastime. And it's exactly what you think it is. It's picking up the phone, calling a CEO or a CFO of a company who's very busy and probably doesn't want to talk to you, and telling them, hey, you know, I got something for you. You know, you should definitely, we want to help you evaluate something. And most of the time you get a no, but once in a while you get a yes. And that's, you know, that's the key, is persistence and continuing to take rejection and being okay with rejection, because that's a big part of what we do. And the second piece is emailing. I love emailing as well. I'm very targeted in how I email people. I try to relate to people. I try not to hit copy paste. And I think that can be very helpful when you're trying to reach out via email. And the third one is LinkedIn. It's a tool that I think is utilized now more, but it wasn't utilized 5 years ago. And again, a great way to connect with people. And I'm on LinkedIn every single day, trying to connect dots. I mean, that's my whole life, is trying to connect dots. I know someone who knows someone whose cousin is a CFO, and how do I get there without being annoying? How do I put myself in the best spot to connect with people? So let's say you're successful and you get a meeting. You schedule this meeting. You know, sometimes we do in person, obviously, but now a lot of it's Zoom. So preparation. And preparation is really exciting because, like I said, there's no set guide of what works and what doesn't. Everyone's different. So if we're pitching a tech company, you know, maybe we put on t-shirts and jeans and we start talking about, you know, what kind of creative marketing push we can give them that shows that we can relate. If we're pitching a law firm, maybe we button up and put on a suit and tie and we talk about resumes, and I talk less, and Eric and George and John and other people who are more senior, spearhead the conversation. And so all of those things go into our preparation. We try to basically figure out what message do we think will best work to resonate with these organizations. And then we pitch the business, right? I mean, that's the most fun part. It's being on the calls, trying to win business. And I think the beauty of how we do things, Eric has a background in consulting, and we really try hard to position ourselves more as advisors and not so much salesy brokers. And I think that's very important in the sense that we want to partner with organizations and we want to help them figure out their real estate, goals, and whether that takes a year or 10 years or 20 years, whatever it is, we're not going to push for some sort of transaction. We want to be there to help nurture them through those decisions. And then I put in some time here. I forgot about lunch, but I do eat lunch sometimes at my desk. And then from 12 to 2, it's kind of tours, administrative work. Again, every day is different, but once we win business, and sometimes we have companies who say, hey, we don't love our office space, or we're growing, or we're shrinking, or we want to be in downtown or somewhere else. We want to go see space. We're like, absolutely. So we'll go and see 6 buildings. We'll tour spaces. And we're constantly touring. Even during COVID, we'll go out and tour spaces with groups to see new office space. And again, as Eric talked about, Chicago is changing so much, and there's so many cool buildings, and there's so many cool areas, right? Fulton Market is a great area that's kind of up and coming, or no, it's fully there, but that's a new area. Pilsen, River North has continued to explode. Lincoln Park, like there's now newer office areas that have some really cool product. And for me, someone who just loves real estate, I love buildings, I love seeing all the different types of office spaces and different build outs. It's really exciting to continue to see new stuff. So that, and then administrative work. So once we win deals, right, what do? Well, a lot of that is busy work, right? So we're going to ask for their leases. We're going to go through every detail of their leases. We're not lawyers, but we try to be in a certain way. And, Eric has a great financial background, and I'll help as well. We'll run analytics to understand costs. So, if we have 3 options on where to go, which one is the most cost effective? Which one is, gives us the most long-term flexibility? Which one is just the coolest space that will help us recruit? And so all that has a financial component that we make sure that we run ourselves and present. And then 2 to 6, more business development. And I think Eric would probably agree with me here. It doesn't matter how many meetings you set up, you can always set up more. And I think that's so important, because I think sometimes, especially when you win business, you have the tendency to just focus all your time there and not keep your pipeline full. And the goal is to continue to keep your pipeline full. I think this, being an office broker, tends to attract people who are competitive. I think having that funded fire to try to win business and create opportunities, again, not being overly competitive, but just wanting to be able to take rejection. So I think business development is a really, really important part of all that.
Mm. Brandon, good job. One thing I wanted to add, and I think it's important for everyone on the call to remember this, and it's clear from hearing what Brandon talked about, is the importance of relationships. And the friends you're hanging with now that even would be part of the junior economic club, right? They're going to go on and do things. And when you're in college, the people you meet, the friendships, the people these things, wherever your life leads you professionally, connecting those dots in the future is going to be important. And so, surrounding yourselves with people that are like you, that are ambitious, that are going to be great students, that are going to go on and do things that'll be a motivation to you, and just being a great friend. That will pay dividends, whatever you do in your life. And certainly the ability, that example that Brandon gave of someone he knows, and this may be someone related to someone, you'll ask that friend, hey, could you make an introduction for me? And if you've been a good friend through years and they know you and have a positive experience and feel you're good person and someone they like, they're going to do that. And those things can lead in the future, finding a job or business you do that's going to pay dividends. So building relationships now and forever. Yeah,
absolutely. And I would add to that, your reputation is everything. I think, I don't remember who said it, but it takes one instance for you to ruin a reputation. It takes, years and years to create one. And so, I'm younger, right? I'm almost 25 years old. But your reputation is very important, especially, it's a very small industry we're in. And it's so crucial to do things with the highest integrity, even if they may not benefit you short term, because in the long term, especially in this business, especially as your friends get older and get into relationship goals, when I turn 40, I'm hopeful that my childhood best friend runs, Salesforce, so I can go to 100 huge offices across the country. I mean, that's just part of life is relationships and keeping that level of integrity. So, my buddy, when he gets to that position, is like, of course, I'm going to use Brandon because I know he's going to do a great job and he's a close friend of mine. So just things to think about as you're kind of going through college, thinking about jobs. You just never know. And I'll get to something later that'll really emphasize you just never know. But more importantly, relationships and integrity and keeping yourself to that standard are super important. So. Okay, so one of my favorites is story time. So you're probably looking at the screen, scratching your head saying, why do I see Uber? So far sounds, I'm not sure, there's probably a few of you who know what that is, and I'll get into what that is, and a crowded bar.
Federales, isn't it?
It is Federales, just someone who spent a lot of time there, George. I'm sure you can tell immediately. So this is a great story, and I really want to share this with you for a couple of reasons, but I'll share it and then I'll tell you why it's important. So I used to be at Davidson Young. I'm 6 months into the business. I know little to nothing about commercial real estate other than what I've learned in school and everything else. So it's a Friday afternoon, and I am at Federales. It's a great little bar in the West Loop, and pre-COVID, it was a place to be, and right now, not so much. And so I'm with my friends, I'm having a couple of drinks, and I get a call from one of my college friends, went to Wisconsin, said, "Hey, Brandon, I'm in Roscoe Village. We got an extra ticket to the So Far Sounds concert. You have to come." And I'm thinking, I don't know, do I really want to go all the way there? Do I want to get an Uber? But okay, and So Far Sounds is a small concert in someone's house. So it's like 80 to 100 people. It's really cool. It's music, whatever. So I get in the Uber, and I've had a couple drinks, and there's an Uber driver. He's probably in his 60s, late early 70s. He's got gray hair, nice beard. He's got an interesting outfit, and he just very talkative. You just kind of knew he wanted to have a conversation. So he asked me, "So what do you do?" And I kind of scratched my head and go, "Well, I do commercial real estate. I help tenants find office space." And to make a long story short, he says, "Oh, wow, you got to talk to my son." I say, "Okay." I write down his information and whatever. And I will fast forward throughout the entire process. But his son, we called him. I called him, met with him. Now a close friend of mine. Turns out to be the chief operating officer of one of the largest private logistics firms in the United States, Traffic Tech. And we do an 11-year, 40,000 square foot lease for them in Chicago, probably 6 to 7 months later, in my first year in the business, just because I got in an Uber ride and struck up a conversation with some random guy who wanted to pick my brain a little bit. So the reason I share this, and I think George and Eric have some stories as well, is you never, ever, ever know. And, don't judge people by how they look, by what they do. It's always, always worth it to just have the conversation, treat everyone as a human being, and you just never know. And, that's a deal that kind of changed my life and my career, my trajectory, and I'm very grateful. So I hope the story resonates with you. I'm not suggesting you should be going to Federales and drinking, getting in Ubers. That's not the goal, but more so, it's a great story. So, George, I know you have a couple of stories as well in your your history.
Yeah, well, something I think may be relevant, and just to underscore again, Brandon, what a great point. I mean, when you are not arrogant or feel you're better than someone, or so into yourself that you're not aware of others, there's a lot more of life that you live and enjoy. And I think that concept that you said there, here's an Uber driver, not far from your age demographic, could have been easy to blow him off. But I think when you treat everyone with dignity and respect and value, regardless of what they're doing, realizing they're a human just like you, trying to do the best they can with the situation they're in, good things come from that. That sort of good vibe that you send out comes back at you. So I think that's just an important part of this. And I think that idea too, Brandon, of wanting your orientation toward the business is, how can I serve? How can I help? And I think being in a situation like that, when you're always with someone thinking, hey, how can I help this person? How can I do something for them? That also leads to good things coming back at you. My story was really about the importance of education. As I mentioned, I was a broker for the first part of my real estate career. But the thing I was enjoying about what I did was when I was able to help organize teams, work with them. And so I was really drawn to considering a full-time job in helping to lead and manage people and organizations. And an opportunity came up at a firm that was a large office owner across the country. And again, I worked for office owners when I was trying to lease their buildings. And this was an opportunity for a 6-office area in the Midwest that had about 19 million feet, really prime office buildings, to help lead the group of individuals that were trying to lease and manage those buildings. So for me, it was a first job doing that, getting away from brokerage. And I interviewed. I knew it was highly competitive. It was a well-regarded firm, and ended up going through the interview process. And I was fortunate to get the job offer. And sort of when all that was through and I accepted this position and made a transition, I went back to the person who hired me, a wonderful Lithuanian gentleman named Arvid Povilaitis. And I said, Arvid, what stood out? Why were you, why did you make the job offer to me? And, among other things, some of the things that were probably evident that, we highlighted in how Brandon dealt with the cab driver. He said, the real tipping point for me was that you ended up having an education that went beyond undergrad, and that you ended up getting a business degree from a good school. And my point in that was, you never know what's going to tip the scale, but you can't fail by doing the best you can with your education, to not squander that, to work hard, to do the best you can, not only to get into colleges, but when you get there, and to take that further if it can. Education won't fail you. And I have 4 children, and one of my daughters married a very, very smart young man who ended up, he was an offensive lineman in college football and didn't take his academics very seriously. He ended up being a math major. And when he finished and wanted to pivot into certain careers, he was blocked a little bit. He ended up going on and finding a route to get a master's in electrical engineering. He did very well at that. He's gotten a wonderful job. But the struggle he had when people looked at his academic background and that he had not gone further really was an impediment and a hurdle. So my challenge to you and the story I have is, do the best you can in school. I know you're all probably highly motivated. You wouldn't be part of this if you weren't. But don't miss the importance of getting all you can from your education, going as far as you can. And you never know if that's going to be the factor that makes a difference for you to get a dream job. So, Eric, how about you? Do you have any stories, anything you could tell the group?
I think I'd like to hear some questions that people have, and then I can probably, turn those questions into stories. I think that will probably be the best use. And so I'll turn it over to Lizzie to moderate any questions that might be coming through or that you might have, and then we can, I can probably create some stories out of those questions.
Sounds good.
Sounds good. Margot just submitted a question and she wanted to ask it.
Hi guys, thank you for doing this. Like right now, we're seeing that many workers are not going back to the office anytime soon because of COVID. And the major tech companies have all kind of predicted and written out that their entire workforce, they want their entire workforce to work from home in the next, coming decades. So where's the future in commercial real estate, and how are you pulling young professionals into this field who are seeing what's happening right now in the field?
That's a great question. So right now, we are kind of in this really odd time, right? Where, you've got these commercial office buildings, and some are in the process of being built. And let's just use downtown Chicago as an example. And maybe they're 10% filled because companies are just, just like you guys are in school, and it's this time where you might want to be in school, but it's, just based on where we are with the pandemic right now, it's just not safe. And so, but I, Margot, I'd like to kind of flip that question back to you, right? So you're at home for the majority of the time now, right? I know there's going to be some time when you go back. How's that working, right? Do you miss your classmates? Do you miss kind of being in school with everyone? Or is it, is this something you can foresee forever, right? You just being in your house, being on Zoom, not being around people. Humans are creatures that crave interaction, okay? And if you think about it from the very aspect of, hey, let's fast forward, 5, 6, 7, 8 years, okay? You graduate college and you just got a job, okay? You're trying to figure out the best way, whatever that job might be, and you're trying to figure out how to navigate that job or within that company. Do you think you can do it from your house? It's going to be very, very complicated. And I think some of these statements that we're hearing right now from these large companies are in reaction to what we're going through right now. I don't think this is going to be a long-term situation. Will there be a situation where you don't have to go into the office 5 days a week and maybe you can work from home 1 or 2 and be a little bit more flexible? I do. And for me personally, and for George, we're at stages in our career where we probably know what it takes to be successful. Brandon's a little younger, okay? And I think, and Brandon, I don't want to speak for you, but my guess is that you want, you want to be around, some more senior level folks in our industry to learn some of the stories and learn how to kind of interact, because working from home gets lonely and it's hard. And so, Brandon, do you agree with that?
Yeah, I can't tell you, especially when I started, how great it was, having tons of young people around me cold calling and reaching out, because when you get rejected, it feels a lot better when the guys next to you, girls next to you are getting rejected as well. Just feel a sense of community. And B, by questions, I don't have to call someone, I don't have to send them a Zoom, whatever. I just walk into, Robert Sevim or Eric Feinberg, who are vice chairman of Savills, and say, hey, what do you think about this? Or have you chased these guys before? What do you feel about it? And I get, an immediate response and some suggestions and constructive criticism and motivation too, right? If I'm in the office and the guy next to me is in there till 6:30, I'm probably not going home to watch TV, whereas I'm at home, I'm working and I have some lunch, my roommate starts doing something, I kind of get distracted. I have ADD, so I can't sit still. And so
Yeah.
So there are lots of things so absolutely, I love being in the office personally. So
yeah. So there will be opportunities for all of you to probably go to school, go to college and just via Zoom. But my guess is that most of you, that does not fulfill the college experience, right? That most of you probably want to go to campus and see what that's like. That's going to be the same thing with work. I think there's going to be a time period, whether that's a year or a couple years, where it's going to be a little bit of this transitionary period. But if you have a choice of either taking a job where it's 100% work from home and you're by yourself in an apartment, or going into a company where they say, hey, you can come here every day and be with people, some similar age, some more senior than you, and you can learn. My guess is that those companies that have an office that offer that up, that's going to be a competitive advantage for those companies.
The other thing I'll add, Margot, is that studies are already proving, as Eric said, the pendulum's begun to swing back. People were very extreme at the moment, and tech companies maybe most so, but companies were saying, we may never need office again. We're not going to work downtown. We want to work in the suburbs where things are less crowded, less chance of getting, disease. And that's begun to come back, and people are trying to figure out how to make it work. But the one thing that's really clear, you need people to physically be together to innovate. Innovation over Zoom is very hard. You can sort of tread water, you can collaborate and work things out, but to move forward and to come up with new ideas, that happens when people are together, and it's just this sort of random sharing of things. The idea that Brandon said, when he has an idea and goes in someone's office, they start bouncing it around and they together come up with a better way. That happens much more easily, maybe totally, when people are physically together. And for companies that really want to continue to advance, that want to do better than their competitors, that want to serve their clients better, they're ultimately going to need to figure out how we come together with more flexibility than ever before for people to work remotely in certain situations for certain periods of time. But ultimately, we're going to need to return. And the other thing I'll add, that's office space. Industrial is going just the other way, which is a viable aspect of commercial real estate. All that's happened with people's getting more comfortable with e-commerce, with ordering everything online, whether it's food to holiday gifts to whatever, that is causing incredible demand for more industrial space. And so in markets like Chicago, lots is getting built. Last year, Amazon, just in the Chicago area, took over 20 million square feet of space. And there are many other companies like them. They're doing the same. So even if office is still trying to figure it out, may come back a little more slowly. Retail certainly dealing with that because people are buying online. They don't need to necessarily walk into stores. Industrial, absolutely. And people are always going to need a place to live, and that's the multifamily. So some areas may be affected. Others are doing better than ever. And that's a little bit of the yin and yang of economic challenges. Some companies are challenged, others can capitalize on other aspects.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Great question.
Yeah, thank you for asking that, and kind of seeing how even though some parts are like retail are kind of not as popular anymore, office space, and there are other things that are becoming more popular to replace it. So we also have another question from Baha, and he wasn't able to ask it live, but he asked, what are the typical career paths that people take in college or right out of college to enter commercial real estate?
Sure. So I can answer some of that. So it can span many different elements, but I'll talk a little bit about it through the lens of how we hire and how recent college grads can get into our business. So the most typical paths are via a research analyst type role, and so really coming in and helping out our research team and understanding different cities or different types of assets and supporting various brokers or analysts. And so that's one type of path, and typical degrees or fields of study that lend to that might be a degree in economics, other degrees in business, or sometimes just a typical liberal arts background can work as well. There are some other fields such as geography or the like that sometimes we hire from also. And then the other types of recent graduate roles that we hire for are financial analysts, right? Those are typically more business oriented, folks that have to have a little bit more of a math or finance background and definitely know how to use Excel a little bit more. Brandon came right into a sales role when he graduated. And that's a little bit atypical, but it shows Brandon's kind of, desire and hard work. But a lot of times getting into the sales or broker roles right away require you to have a little bit more of a background in how buildings work or how business works. Some schools specialize that in a little bit more. So University of Wisconsin, as Brandon mentioned, has got a great real estate program. Indiana also has got a great real estate program, and the Wharton School at University of Pennsylvania, just to name a few, do have real estate programs that make the transition into that role a little bit easier. So hopefully I answered your question a little bit.
Eric, I'm going to embellish too. Locally, DePaul has a very good real estate school.
Yeah,
so
DePaul, yeah.
That's a wonderful option, and they actually recruited some from Wisconsin for their professors. But as Brandon said, it's a very interesting business. It's not like most schools offer a real estate major. The ones that do tend to be a little more finance oriented. So a high percentage of people end up majoring in different things and still find their way into the field. So some of it is cultivating relationships with real estate people. But one of the fields I'm very high on that could work is this property management field. And people come into that, you might have a communications degree or something that's a little more general. And the thing about property management is it's a very diverse job. You're doing a little bit of everything every day. If you like finance, there are budgets. And there are bidding contracts. If you like people, you're interacting with the building staff and tenants in the building. There's something for everyone. Every day is diverse, and you can make a nice living managing a building. And obviously, someone who's managing one of these large downtown buildings, there's a lot of complexity, but also an opportunity to make a very nice living. And there's a security about it. Sometimes owners of buildings change, but they keep the management companies and the people managing the buildings because they know them so well. So there are generalist ways to also get in the business. It's cultivating the relationships. So
just one other thing. The last field of study that sometimes lends very well to our business is some semblance of architecture or engineering as well. And so a lot of times that just gives you a broader level of understanding on how buildings operate and work. And there's one field within our company or one profession called project management or construction management, and there are many schools that do have majors in that regard. I know Purdue being the leading one. So that's another path in.
And I can just tell you quickly from personal experience, I was a real estate major at University of Wisconsin in the business school, real estate and urban land economics. I had different internships working at a place called ICM Properties, where I rented apartments and worked in acquisitions. And then when I graduated, you kind of have two paths out of real estate. And this is super high level. The first is being an analyst, and whether you go to a place like Savills or somewhere like Blue Vista or Waterton, where they're buying big multifamily stuff, and they just need analysts. That's one level. I was more sales oriented. I needed something a little more, so I identified brokerage, right? And there's industrial, office, retail, investment sales. I wanted to be in office because it's the people I knew. It was competitive, and so I just reached out to my network and got in front of the right people. But the reason we're here, or among a lot of reasons, for me personally, is because I don't think anyone did a good job of communicating what brokerage is and opportunities for young people to get involved. So that's why I think that's such a great question. And I think we're the industry, we're trying to hopefully open it up to younger people so that there are opportunities to get involved out of school and peak interest in college as opposed to later on in people's careers.
Lizzie, I saw that Tyler asked a question about internships, and I'd be happy to answer that if you'd like. Tyler, that's a great way to get a taste of the business and figure out a little bit. And I would say we said we're the 5th largest firm globally. A number of our counterparts will have summer internships. A lot of that comes from the relationship with who you know that might hire you. We do have a limited number of internships each summer. I will mention that Savills has already also started what we call a junior broker development program. And this year, we hired 10 people directly out of college. We started with 8 in New York, 2 in Washington, D.C. And next year, we're adding, also hiring people out of college, Chicago, Houston, and L.A. But this is a 15-week program where there's different education that's very formalized about the business. There's a chance to do rotations with the different aspects of what we do in the business, and the various aspects of how we counsel and advise people. And that's another program that, instead of what Brandon and Eric do, where they get paid when deals close, and it's a field that does have opportunity to do well financially, so people are willing to take that risk to do brokerage. This internship pays a very handsome salary for 15 months as you figure out what to do, and often leads to full-time employment. So we do summer internships on a limited basis, and also a limited number of people joining this program at Savills at the end of each academic year now. So.
Yeah, thanks for answering those. It sounds like there are a lot of different paths you can take to get involved in commercial real estate. And that's great that Savills is setting up this new program that a lot of the high schoolers can consider now as they're entering and graduating college. So we have another question, I believe, from Grace, and she wanted to ask that live.
Hi, so first of all, thanks for coming today. I really appreciate the little introduction to commercial real estate, and especially what resonated with me is the advice on like integrity in your work and furthering your education. That was really important to me as well. So I see that there's definitely a lot of economic impact in real estate, but I was wondering if there were some careers in real estate that have some social impact too, like for example, working with nonprofits or working with community initiatives.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, sure. That's a great question. I can take a quick stab at answering some of that. So I would say I'm going to answer it on a couple of fronts. One, we work with a number of not-for-profits and associations on figuring out how real estate can work to help support their goals. And so, I'm just going to name a few that we've been, highly active with. So the YMCA of Metropolitan Chicago, we helped them identify a building on Van Buren and set up their social center there. Prior to that, it was the Jane Addams Hull House, which was a very well-known, well-established Chicago not-for-profit. For many, many years, I advised the Illinois Medical District, which is where the VA hospital and Cook County Hospital is located, on how best to utilize their land holdings and support the community. And so there are many opportunities on a consulting basis or an advisory basis to help those types of institutions. Mostly in the development world, this piece always comes up, right? Now, specifically, it's a very hot topic right now in the city of Chicago. If you want to build a residential development, specifically in a neighborhood like a River North or downtown Chicago or Gold Coast, what's happening right now is you can't just go and build, developers just can't go out and build, developments for the highest price possible, catering to, the highest price buyers. There's an affordable housing component now that comes into play. And so with all of this, every developer has to be very fluent, and most commercial real estate professionals have to be somewhat fluent in how that works, right? And what are, if you own a building, or you're thinking about, developing a new building, how do I work with the city in fulfilling these, requirements to meet, social goals? And some of those goals are, as I mentioned before, hiring workers to help, work on those buildings, and not only just work on those buildings from a construction angle, but work to maintain them long term. And then, from an affordable housing standpoint, or maybe there's a component of your office building that, works with, not-for-profits or the like, that is definitely coming into play. And then, taking it a step further, and this, a little bit different than your question, but every building and every company right now that's going into, an office building is often concerned about, image and marketing. Okay, so I'm going into this new building, I'm paying a lot of money for it, but is that the best place for my money to go, right? How can I kind of spin it a little bit to make sure that it portrays my company or myself as an executive in that company, in the right realm? And so a lot of buildings, are implementing, green building status or wellness status, making sure that, they understand that their environmental footprint, in whatever building they go to, reflects what the company's environmental programs are. And so it is woven in quite a bit. I will tell you that at the end of the day, most developers are for the most part, they need to make sure that they maintain a certain level of profitability. And so, there are other, nonprofit funds that focus on a little bit more of the community aspect but from the, the basic, commercial real estate level that we work with, that there has to be a level of profitability that makes sense, but while being smart about implementing some of the, the social impact causes that you talk about.
Go ahead, Lizzie.
Yeah, thanks for kind of emphasizing like the balance that you need between profitability but also serving the community. Alp had another question, I think, in a somewhat similar sense, so he can ask that now as well.
Yeah, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day. And my question really builds off of Grace's, like, do you have any stories where you firsthand saw the effect that real estate could have on building the community and helping it to improve?
Sure, I'll take another, quick answer to that. So, as I mentioned before, I had done some consulting for the Illinois Medical District, which is basically a unit of local government. It's on the west side. It's it's home to the UIC Medical Campus, Rush, the VA Hospital, and Cook County Hospital. But if you've ever driven through there or ever been over to that part of the city, you'll notice that there's a lot of empty land as well. Okay, and really that area was designated in the 1950s as a medical district to serve, the residents of Chicago, and it did so in somewhat of a good fashion, but it created a lot of these institutions that were siloed. So the VA hospital was a hospital that just served veterans. Then there was Cook County Hospital that served people that, lived in Cook County that could not necessarily afford, Rush or Northwestern or University of Chicago. And so there were all these institutions, and they didn't really come together that much to kind of, really, utilize the district as it was meant to be utilized, as sharing ideas and creating best practices and creating this very lively area. And so what we did was we identified some land, and one of the reasons why this was because it wasn't, the Illinois Medical District was never really seated with some of the elements that make community. Okay, so just have these big hospitals and these big buildings everywhere. But if you think about the elements that make community, it's retail, it's restaurant, it's residential, it's all these things that bring people together. It's not just these big buildings. And so our idea was, okay, well, what could we do to kind of to do that, right? And so it was really to engage the developer community in a very prescriptive approach into what we needed to help kind of, sow the seeds to bring these folks together. And so one thing that happened was the old Cook County Hospital was redeveloped into a hotel. Obviously, that's not getting utilized to the fullest extent right now, but it's out there, right? We developed, there's a Starbucks that has gone into the Illinois Medical District, and there were really, if you were an employee at Rush University Hospital or UIC, the only thing that you could eat at was the cafeteria downstairs. At the end of the day, if you wanted to go out for dinner, there was very, very little around there. And so, the plans have been put in place and plans have been put in motion to kind of seed, to build that community. And so that's just one idea that I can reference.
That's often referred to. There's just a little thing you can keep in mind, but it's called work, live, play. And you need those three elements for a community really to come alive. And Brandon had talked about, this Fulton Market area, which is west of the Kennedy Expressway, just west of downtown, that there certainly was some live there. There were different apartment and condominium options. There was play, there was some restaurants, but pulling those together and then finding a way to put work in there, and then it sort of exploded. One other thing I wanted to mention too is an example of doing good in a community through development. And some of this is some of the parameters, as Eric mentioned, that cities or communities put in place. Sterling Bay, who I worked with for part of my career, was the developer that really got that Fulton Market area going. And the aldermen in that area required, and as part of what the city requires, if you're doing a development, a certain portion of what you would spend needs to go to better the community. And for instance, when Sterling Bay proposed to develop this office building at 333 North Green Street, the thing that they offered to the community and was accepted, and part of them getting approval for development, was to build a new public library in that neighborhood. It lacked one compared to other wards and areas of the city of Chicago. And so that's something that went back to that community that a developer did because of that trade-off, and the city holding developers accountable to make sure that the profit motive isn't the only thing. It's calling them to accountability to do something good for the community too. So.
And I would just add one thing, and we could talk about hours on this topic, but if you take some place like Pilsen, right, that is historic, that has been the same for a long time, and in the last 5 years has gone through a complete change, gentrification. I think it's important to remember that there's not always a black and white answer, right? So developers can come in, they can build a huge building, they can create tons of jobs, and they can revitalize a community, but they may also push some people out who can't afford to live there anymore, right? So I think it's important to remember in all these conversations that there's pros and cons to a lot, and it depends on what's important and how things look both short-term and long-term, right? So again, we could go for hours on that topic, and it's super complicated and very interesting, but I just wanted to give you that little nuance because I think that's important to keep in mind when you're talking about new development and communities in real estate.
Lizzie, I noticed that Tyler also asked about how attorneys are compensated to work on real estate. Should I just answer that in 30 seconds?
Yeah.
Unlike Brandon and Eric, who are commission brokers, even though they're advising and consulting clients and get paid when transactions close, law firms would, oh yeah, he said he's wondering if they were similar. Law firms that get hired to do work around real estate would sometimes, bid to get chosen, or there may be a relationship, and they charge whoever uses them an hourly rate for each of their attorneys, different levels. Very senior attorneys obviously get paid more than people who have just joined the firm. but they get that, they charge that for that work, and from that money, the law firm in general collects. They pay the different attorneys that work for the law firm. So, it's incumbent upon a developer to try to make sure it's the right mix of seniority and professionals to get the work done. And of course, not too many hours that they're billing, but that's how they get paid. So that's why your mom's able to help provide for your family, because she's not having to live off of commissions. Though some attorneys do, but generally.
Yeah, so I think that was really great hearing about the many different facets of real estate and things most people probably hadn't even considered in terms of how you make sure you're accommodating the community around it, how people can enter these careers, the many different options that are available within it. So we really appreciate all three of you speaking at our event today and informing high school students about commercial real estate. And thank you, Brandon, for setting this up as well. I think everyone really learned a lot. That isn't, like you said, it's not something that's talked about a lot in high school or in college. So we really appreciate that. Just as an update for some of our upcoming events for JEC members, we have our winter forum next Saturday. So we have a few speakers and an entrepreneurship competition. And then the week after that, we have another event on equity sales. If you're not a member, you can always apply on our website. We also have community events every month. So next month, we'll have an event with the Wharton Undergraduate Finance Group and a Morningstar stock pitching event. So those are open, and you can follow our social media to stay updated about that. But thank you everyone for coming today. And thank you again, Brandon, George, and Eric for speaking.
It was a pleasure to be part of it, and I wish everyone the best. And I hope you all wind up in commercial real estate. It's a great field.
Thank you so much, guys. We really appreciate your time. We enjoyed talking to you, and we hope you took away some stuff from this. So thank you. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for having us.
Bye-bye now.